I'm the president of Ohio Excels, and I'm really excited to be with you this morning for the first in a series of webinars that we're going to be doing, sponsored by Ohio Excels and the Complete to Compete Coalition. Ohio Excels is really honored to lead the Complete to Compete Coalition. It is a coalition of 50 state and regional organizations, all committed to moving the needle around moving the attainment numbers in the state of Ohio. We've been working together for the last 3 or 4 years, making great progress at the state level, the regional level, and the local level. Many of you that are on the call today participate with us in the coalition. If you are on the call today and you're not aware of the coalition, shoot us a note. We're always looking for great partners to join us in this effort. We know that if we're going to move the needle for Ohioans and we're going to ensure that all Ohioans have the opportunity to earn a family sustaining wage, and if we're going to grow our economy, it is going to take all of us to do that. So just shoot us a note, and happy to have you join our work going forward. As I mentioned, this is the first of 5 webinars that we will be doing. You'll see at the end of this presentation today that we have another one coming up in April. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention that we are on May 4th hosting our 4th AIM Higher symposium, really focused on the intersection of education and workforce. It is our 4th AIM Higher event. However, it will be only the 2nd in person. So fingers crossed that we can all join together in person at the Hilton. So just wanted to make you aware of that. But without further ado, we've got about just over 100 folks joining us today for this conversation. I think you'll find this conversation today to be interesting and extremely thought-provoking. It focuses on a number of issues that we all have been talking about for a number of years, but I think will really push our thinking to new heights about what it might take to really move the needle for Ohioans. So our guests today are Joel Vargas and Kyle Hartung for Jobs for the Future, also known as JFF. Joel is the Vice President of Programs, where he oversees programs focused on improving learning systems and outcomes. And Joel works on advancing policies that promote improved high school and post-secondary outcomes for underserved students. So obviously, 2 areas that we are extremely excited to think about and talk about here in Ohio. So their focus today is going to be on a recent paper that they wrote called The Big Blur. And it proposes a radical, albeit I think needed, restructuring of grades 11 through 14 by really erasing the arbitrary divides that we find between high school and college and work. They make the case for a new type of institution, a new type of thinking that meets the needs of students where they're at. And so we are excited to have Joel and Kyle with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joel and Kyle.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Really, it's great to be here. We want to thank Ohio Excels, your team there, for inviting us to share time and this perspective with you, and all of our JFF colleagues, and we are just so grateful for your leadership and your support in helping to improve education for every Ohio student. And we're proud to have partnered today over time with so many of you joining the conversation today. Kyle and I were spying names as you were signing on, and we said, oh, we know, there's Steve, there they go. So it's terrific to see so many of you, and we look forward to doing more in the future. So JFF's mission, just for a sec, is to drive change in the American workforce and education systems to achieve economic advancement for all. Again, I'm Joel Vargas. I'm a vice president. I'm based out here in our office in Oakland, California, where the sun is coming up. So happy to be here in Ohio with you through the wonders of technology. But I'll just say my oversight of programs is national in scope, including many efforts designed over the years to improve transitions of students from high school to and through post-secondary credentials and careers. And that's been a professional passion of mine for nearly 20 years at JFF. Time flies when you're having fun and trying to make an impact. And before coming to JFF, I was a teacher, researcher, and a program leader focused on the same set of issues. So I guess to echo Lisa, I preface that our comments today are really intended to be provocative and asking you to engage in a thought experiment with us. It might lead to new insights for how to advance positive changes for Ohio's young people, in the state's economy. So my colleagues and I at JFF recently published this white paper called The Big Blur, as Lisa mentioned, where we make a pretty audacious set of recommendations, which really question why we keep trying to build better bridges between high school, college, and careers when those divisions are vestiges of an industrial age economy that lose students at every critical transition point. The systems were, in fact, never designed to produce a number of highly skilled workers and post-secondary trained workers that the economy now needs. Kyle, could you go to the next slide, please? So in the paper, we call for new structures that would better serve roughly 16 to 20-year-old young adults. One way to think about it is as 2 years of college included in high school, or 2 years of high school included in college. I hesitate to say that because it conjures up those traditional notions, because what we're talking about are structures that would neither be high schools nor community colleges. Rather, they'd be new configurations for all students, and they'd be free for students, and they would include guided career pathways and labor market aligned sequences of work-based learning experiences co-designed with regional employers, and they culminate in credentials that give young people direct access to the labor market and further for post-secondary education, should they choose to go on. So I'll admit that this idea is really born out of impatience. For one thing, among others that we cite in the paper, as the data kind of illuminate here, the incremental improvements in post-secondary attainment that we're seeing at least since the Lumina Foundation, these are their stats here, and others started measuring nationally. They're too slow, especially for Black, Latinx, and people from low-income backgrounds. And while we're pretty good in getting better at increasing access to post-secondary, if students don't succeed and too many don't, going to and dropping out of college while taking on hard to pay debt actually perpetuates economic inequity. Other thing I'll say is I bring my own discontents and impatience to this. It includes my own experience as a first-generation college goer and my later professional experience trying to support first-generation college goers sort out and navigate through all the financing, prerequisites, academic preparation, admissions processes, self-confidence, identity, efficacy, belongingness gaps, that really seem designed to block these students from going to and completing college. Not to mention finding post-secondary paths aligned to a career path, or even gainful employment for that matter. The little program that I was raised in that helped me meet those challenges, and that later inspired others that I designed and led. Even when you put them together with all the other points of light, they're never going to be of a sufficient scale to meet our economic needs and overcome the absurdly high barriers to access and success that we see nationally. So that's what attracted me many moons ago to JFF's work to promote the work of early college schools and other models that incorporate strategically designed college experiences into the high school curriculum, including those that incorporate career and technical courses and pathways leading to post-secondary credentials and degrees, often by the end of high school. and I was attracted to them because they modeled what a more streamlined set of transitions could look like. But even that work, suffice it to say, is too frustratingly slow to grow and arduous to operate and implement because of the differences that each partnership you see has to reconcile between secondary and post-secondary, scheduling systems, faculty requirements, funding flows, and restrictions, among other differences. So our team is noted with great interest and promoted the national rise of a range of efforts that, like early colleges, are trying to change post-secondary outcomes by reorganizing support systems, instructional delivery, guidance, and financing across K-12 and post-secondary, in addition to partnering with employers to design work-based learning experiences. So you have some notable efforts in Ohio, among them some partnerships. We certainly don't claim to know all of them, but just things we know about. They're partnerships enabled by College Credit Plus. You have a network of early college high schools. They're efforts spawned by regional collaboratives like the Central Ohio Compact and through the Education Service Centers. There are also regions that have participated over the years, just to plug our own network, the JFF's Pathways to Prosperity Network, which has certainly an aligned focus, and including Dayton, Columbus, and Tiffin City. And there are colleges that work with the Ohio Student Success Center on guided pathways, including some that reach into high schools. So why don't we go to the next slide, please? To inform this report, sorry for the tiny print. I'm sure we'll leave a set of leave behind slides that you can gander at later, but we spoke with many innovative practitioners and policymakers and influencers nationally who are implementing these kinds of approaches, including those who lead strong high schools, which found that simply preparing students for college was insufficient to see them succeed in college. And then they therefore said, let's extend our support systems. Let's create 13th year programs. And they developed online and blended college courses and brick and mortar partnerships with colleges and work-based learning experiences with employers, all to create critical momentum for their students through some college with a stronger career orientation. We talked to leaders of colleges trying to reach down into high schools with dual enrollment opportunities, sometimes wedded with career and guided pathways that give students an accelerated boost into post-secondary programs of study. And leaders from colleges trying to increase efficiency and reduce costs through improved transfer, streamlined systems, and learn-and-earn partnerships. And we spoke with system leaders and policymakers adjusting graduation requirements to make space for more future-oriented courses and experiential activities, and trying to use coordinated policymaking across systems to increase alignment and pathways. So we also included employers like IBM and Honda, including Scott McLemore in Marysville, no less, who we think we spied is joined the meeting here. So hey, Scott. They're supporting work-based learning experiences for high school students as a way to develop a pipeline of skilled workers to their industry sectors. So the headline really is like, we talked to all these folks, and while so many of them told us about how their efforts are trying to navigate through, but are also constrained by systems fragmentation, policy disincentives, and frankly, mindsets tied to the archetypes about the structures and sequencing of how students move through education and into the working world. So, their efforts are designed to ameliorate those, but at the same time, they're constrained fundamentally by those kinds of divisions. And what we propose in the Big Blur tries to flip that script. So what if instead of building models that work in spite of and around these systems, kind of as band-aids, patches, one-off workarounds, what if we instead built systems and new types of institutions that are made to do by design what these models are trying to fix unnecessary, because what they do would become the new normal. So with that, I'm going to turn it to my colleague Kyle to talk about some of the key features of such a system.
Friends, it's great to be back here in Ohio, and thanks again to Lisa and the Ohio Excels team for bringing us on. And thanks for the transition point here, Joel. And so really looking forward to sharing with you some of what we're claiming in this paper. And so taking stock of the historical work that we've seen occur in the field, current experience and efforts underway, as well as this recent research that Joel just reviewed, really suggest to us a number of features of that would be essential to this new kind of system design. And so what's one of those things? Well, we would need to see new types of incentives that are ultimately structured to promote new ways of organizing learning and support systems that span grades 11 to 14. These systems would be held accountable for defined outcomes in this period, and current funding streams could be braided, used flexibly, and dedicated ones created as needed for systems ultimately serving students in these grades. A second key feature that we imagine here is needing to see the intentional and required alignment of systems that ultimately enable 11th grade students to enter these new types of institutional structures that incorporate high school and college requirements, that are designed explicitly for career preparation, and that really have work experience baked in, not just as an add-on or a nice to have. These structures, if done well, would really enable students to take these incremental steps on a career path and ultimately result in credentials with labor market value by the end of grade 14, and the ability to progress into further education. So really a system that has no dead ends. And there shouldn't be, frankly, for young people or young adults or adults for that matter. Another key feature of this system that we imagine is ultimately a need for reimagining governance. What does a team or an empowered senior leader with real decision-making authority look like, that oversees, ensures, and secures funding for, and ultimately then supports a really integrated and unified grade 11 to 14 that includes these pathways aligned to each state's economic development strategy? And so it's really marrying an education and workforce development policy agenda. And a real critical piece here, and a big lift, I think, is the need to reimagine staffing structures to really equip ultimately specially trained educators and leaders who are prepared to teach and curate and organize learning and work experiences and these support systems for students in these grades, which would be co-designed and really reimagined by top teachers in K-12 and colleges, including those from technical areas and with industry expertise, who really know what it takes to support students in this age group to make a more seamless transition into adulthood in these highly skilled jobs. And we know that these are really tall orders, but as Joel named at the beginning of this, our intention here is to be provocative. We don't have all of the solutions at hand, and we really see this as work that requires partnership directly with people in the field to really generate what does bringing these things about into reality look like. That being said, there are some states that we see already taking some steps in this direction. And we see these as sort of like early signals about what might be possible if we wanted to push toward greater blurring. I'm not going to deep dive into this slide in tremendous detail. Joel said you'll have this for later reference. And we also don't cite these to suggest that this is what Ohio could or should adopt, any of these specific ideas. But just as Ohio would need to do, these states that we present here are those that have adopted approaches after assessing what could work in their own unique context. So among other examples, what is included here? Adjustments to graduation requirements and accountability systems that encourage schools to increase the completion of early post-secondary and career experiences. Seeing trends toward funding for real grade 13 programs designed to help students build momentum in post-secondary programs of study with really critical and targeted supports of their high schools. And ultimately seeing emerging scholarships for students to avail themselves of these same early opportunities. We're also seeing movement around paying on the basis of outcomes. I see districts in Texas and Colorado get a per pupil bonus for college enrollment and completion of post-secondary certificates, among other post-secondary outcomes. So promising practices, and the idea that we have is how do we start to build on these and test them and stress where they might work and when and under what conditions. We also recognize, just to be really transparent, that a significant barrier we face collectively in realizing this vision is the need to do the hard work of ultimately changing a collective mindset about public responsibility in this space. So we argue in the paper that part of why there's such a great and durable divide between secondary and post-secondary is ultimately college and post-secondary education is largely seen as an individual's responsibility, and that the returns on that investment are largely private. But we sort of imagine a different view of this, which is like bridges and roads and fire departments, public services that we don't necessarily think about being there for us. Post-secondary education ought to be a public responsibility because it ultimately fulfills a communal need and should be truly accessible to all, if not expected. And it's a responsibility that goes beyond making it affordable or free, though that's obviously an important aspect, but it's ultimately about a responsibility to develop the structures and systems that ensure that students and young adults are able to succeed. And if we can adopt a view that 2 years of college is not a public good, but a public responsibility, I think that how we approach solving the challenges we face in college access and completion might be a bit bigger and ultimately a bit bolder. Couple of final thoughts here as we think about like, well, what's the present opportunity and then what's really the road ahead here? So as suggested in this public narrative claim, public responsibility claim, we need to create new narratives that sort of instantiate a demand and ultimately legitimize new models and systems. And that presents an opportunity and a challenge in the attention, for instance, that free college has gotten. Even as it now seems to be off the table at the federal level. So on the one hand, it could be a landmark change, free college. But on the other hand, and ironically, it could actually make the public and policymakers think that their work is done here. Like we've arrived and that we have no more direction. There's not additional movement that we need to make here. But ultimately, we've really got to get parents and young people and communities to not just call for free college, but to really seek out and demand better paths to and through post-secondary education that ultimately ensures that more students finish and are very specifically connected to good careers with career ladders. And some of that work requires building and pointing to the successful outcomes of good models that can shine a light on the needed systems changes we need to see. Another opportunity and challenge is the unprecedented stimulus funding coming into K-12 and colleges and other entities. The challenge is that because a lot of those dollars to date, for example, the ESSER dollars, they've flowed to states with very few strings attached. There's really no clear incentive for locals to do anything differently. Now, the flip side of that is that those who already have precedent and potential for doing work that blurs these boundaries more can really leverage these investments to accelerate their efforts with proper encouragement and support and provocation. And we know that some regions have done this kind of work before in pathway systems, and conceivably there may be promise to do more aggressive blurring with some of these funds, in part by bringing together parts of their stimulus funding and braiding it with other systemic level funding to really build these big blurs. Change is all the more important to advocate for, as we saw how many students nationally during the pandemic lost their footing and became disconnected from their high school or their post-secondary education. Ultimately, for many of them to get jobs that were needed to support themselves and or their families. And so it's really a moment to continue to call the question about the need to really reimagine how are we going to re-engage students and get them ready for these skilled careers, including through blurring these lines between learning and work so that young people are able to get solid economic footing now and while staying on the path to the credentials and degrees that they need to economically advance and fill the demand for skilled jobs in the future. So a couple of closing thoughts, and welcome Joel back in here. Our next phase of this work on the Big Blur is really about trying to advance this vision by understanding how we can drive it through different units of change. Joel referenced these early on, right? Like, what are the units of change as we think about systems and policies, models, regional efforts, and ultimately through these broader campaigns at both ground level, but also state or national level, to really shift narratives and mindsets. And we're hopeful that there may be states where there's a kind of a superfecta of these conditions, so to speak, or see all four of these that could really be leveraged to build these big blur demonstrations. And frankly, we're also really heartened and hopeful about some of the signals that we've been hearing out of the US Department of Education that's expressed direct interests to us and a number of our national partners about how to better support some of these bolder visions around career-connected education strategies for youth, which could really open the door for blurring. So the other places where we see great promise for pursuing more blurring have organizations, much like Ohio Excels and other partners here in Ohio, to serve in this intermediary capacity and advocate at state and regional levels between business leaders, educators, policymakers, and who do the hard work of building partnerships and policies that can bridge and break through the status quo siloed systems that we see. So we encourage you and really welcome you into this conversation to use this state leadership platform to build new systems, strategies, and commitments toward a change agenda that blurs the lines between high school, college, and work. And ultimately, conveners like Ohio Excels and forums like these can ultimately catalyze cross-sector work that can really advance your individual and collective interest in a skilled workforce and thriving economy. It's a really exciting moment and a really exciting time. Joel, any other final thoughts you would like to share here today?
No, I think we covered all the ground. I look forward to trying to answer some of the questions of the folks here today. And I hope that we have helped you to maybe just kind of think a little differently about the prospects for change in the future. So Lisa, back to you. Thanks again for having us.
Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. Because I can't get my video back on. Apparently Kevin is blocking me, which is fine. We do have some questions. One of the questions is, we talked a lot about policymakers and educators, but can you talk a little bit about the role of the business community and employers in really leaning in to provide some of these opportunities for students in a broader and deeper way?
Kyle, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I can start there. And if I missed some of the stem of that question, Lisa, don't refrain from re-putting it out there. I think it's a critical role. And in the paper, we had to make some hard decisions about where to put a lot of the focus of the story we wanted to tell. But I think that one of the ongoing and systematically missing links in this is the real role of employers, not just as partners, but really as co-designers and contributors to these systems. And so long as we keep designing things in siloed ways, even well-intentioned and well-designed, we're really going to miss the mark at some of these opportunities to really, as I think Joel referenced, we've gotten really good at patching things together and creating better connections across these systems. But how do we really create something that, and listen, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we become Switzerland or Germany. Like, we're not. We're a different country, and our states are different. But there are signals that we've learned over time from studying those systems about the way that employers invest in, and not just with dollars, but with resources and with intellectual capital, to set really big tables with their own partners within sector or cross-sector and have real conversations about what are the competencies and skills that our young people need to really enter this labor market and workforce. What are the roles and responsibilities of larger employers to possibly ante up some of that intellectual capital and sometimes the financial capital to establish ways of working that small and medium-sized businesses, who often will do lots of the heavy lifting at regional levels, that they can leverage to enter this conversation very quickly, rather than feeling like they're always having to design something from scratch. Outline really clearly what it really takes to participate in coordinating with educators in K-12 and post-secondary to design really aligned sequences of learning that span academic and technical and work-based experiences, so that they don't feel piecemeal to young people, but that it feels like a coherent story that they're a part of, and not something that's merely just being done to them. So a huge role for them to play. I don't know, Joel, what else would you say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the more promising efforts we've seen, but they're few and far between from our perspective, are ones where employers really see this as integral to their bottom line and understand that ROI, on the investment. And, frankly, as much as I love and appreciate, and we need to start from anywhere that we can, corporate and social responsibility shops, doing this work with high schools, it's got to start to touch kind of like the HR, the human resources folks, having them see this as imperative and integral to building a talent pipeline. And that shift, by and large, has not happened yet. Although, out of crisis comes opportunity. And I think understanding right now that we have, albeit a very unusual labor market, but one that is having a hard time finding skilled workers, does not have as many young people. The young people that are coming up increasingly are those that our system struggle to serve well. So it just feels like there's a moment here where employers may see, older high school youth as potential, contributors to their companies and invest in solutions with colleges and high schools that lead to opportunities with their companies.
Thank you. One of the other questions that we received was, can you talk a little bit about how this model results in better retention and completion for students who go to college or are working towards a credential or certificate? How do we get beyond the access to the completion?
Yeah, in part, it's a great question. It is really, in large part, what inspired the idea, which was sort of by thinking of an institution that is grade 11 through 14, you're basically creating what that is messaging is the expectation for people who complete their education is a post-secondary credential. So there would be no need for, it would just sort of be a natural transition. There would be no kind of admissions processes. There would be a seamless navigation into what comes traditionally as what we thought of as being after high school. It's just a natural transition into what comes next. We would have to, I think, it's simpler than that, right? But in a sense, the structure would signal something far different and actually create a choice architecture in which students seamlessly just go into a pathway that leads to a career and a post-secondary credential. This is why we talked about staffing, for example. You need to build the capacity of the system to support students in a different way. And I think the closest we've come to sort of saying, what could you use now to create these kinds of approaches? One is guided pathways at the community college level, in many respects embodies this kind of approach for students who enter into community college, all right, and trying to meet them where they're at, create these pathways seamlessly into good career paths and choices. What if you reached down and started earlier in the high school? I feel like that's something short of a big blur that folks, probably many in this room today, could start to try to design. But that is the idea, is it is a completion strategy by design.
So piggybacking on that, one of the questions talks about really looking at the competencies and skills that are required for our secondary students and in our standards. Do you see a need to change some of those standards at the high school level and really change some of the high school courses? Should we be adding or replacing? What do you see as, until we can get to the full big blur, a step that we could be taking potentially at the high school level?
I do think that I like to think of this work very much as evolution. And when I think about the amount of practitioners and frankly, even families and students who are on the ground, and this big idea of moving the goalposts can be really scary for folks. And so how do we try, maybe what I hear in this question is evolving what some of those standards look like. And so simultaneously adding some different types of competency and skill requirements, that is this merging of academic and technical and work-based that requires the merging of those three things, and that realizing that maybe some of these other pieces that we've historically held on to because it's what we've always done, we can start to let go of. And this is not about lowering standards for English or math. This is more about putting a bold stake in the ground about the types of skills and competencies that young adults need to be successful in the labor market in general, and what are those transferable skills? But also, is there a way to back map from career or economic metrics as we think about aligning backwards through systems in terms of the accountability structures that we hold one another accountable to? You know, right now, high school is very much seen as the high school graduation is very much seen as a destination or an end point, rather than the beginning of something, or frankly, one point along a stop along the way. And so, if we are to move those goalposts the way Joel was just talking about, I do think that, yeah, we do need to start to reimagine some of those high school expectations and requirements. But can we do it in a way that says, this is not about reimagining the high school piece of this, this is reimagining what we expect of young people, which may span what traditionally occurs in high school and post-secondary. So I think it's a little bit also about reshaping that whole conversation, and recentering what we're talking about, as opposed to high school requirements versus post-secondary, as opposed to that space in the middle.
So one of the challenges that I think we run up against sometimes is the expectation of what is the purpose of high school? And to, Kyle, you said, sort of an endpoint. I think many of us think of it as, one of the pieces of the journey that ultimately leads to students and young people having meaningful employment. So are there places that you've seen that have done a good job of really connecting employment outcomes with some of these opportunities for students to both see how our institutions are doing, but really making the case for why we need to be doing more of this kind of work on behalf of students and families?
Joel, anything coming to mind, top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need, they're far and few between, but it's not to diminish efforts that are really important that are going on. And we're talking about trying to create a system that, incents and enables more of that at scale. But one example I've seen, and it speaks to a couple of comments that I think I've spied in the chat and the Q&A. They do. I think the ones with the most potential are really employer led, and employers are actually dedicating the resources, as Kyle mentioned earlier, to create co-designing those partnerships. So the Wonderful Company, which is a big agricultural conglomerate out in the Central Valley, I think the biggest producers of almonds in the world, they really saw the writing on the wall that, first of all, they've always been pretty community minded, and have created a number of efforts to try to improve circumstances for young people growing up in the community. But one of the things that they did was to create these pathways to associate's degrees that could lead to employment at not only their firm, but also they recruited neighboring agricultural firms to contribute as well, and to pledge to do sponsor work-based learning experiences, to co-design the curriculum that included a pathway that not only where students could graduate from high school, but get associate's degrees in agricultural business, mechanics, science. And these were pegged to jobs where these companies felt like they were going to have a labor market shortage. And the effort still is pretty young, Lisa, and the outcomes, the interim outcomes look really good. In fact, I think what is a little, interesting about this, and I'll admit it, is what you see is in many circumstances that those pathways, which are so well designed and pegged to employer needs, also were designed so that students could go to the University of California or the California State University system. I think they're finding many of those students actually choose to do that, which is, not a bad outcome when you think about the counterfactual. So, and, you got to think that down the road, eventually what they're going to see is, hey, and I remember Wonderful, I remember the other companies that gave me this opportunity, and they want to stay. A lot of those students want to stay close to home. So, I think we have ways to see like what those kind of employment outcomes there are in for that particular example. but some of the interim outcomes are pretty good.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask one last question and then we're going to wrap it up. You started the presentation really talking about sort of the slow trajectory and that we're just really not moving the needle far enough and fast enough, especially for certain populations of students. As you think about the big blur and, the opportunity to get more students into these kinds of pathways and opportunities, can you talk about some of the barriers that, and I think you may have referred to them as absurdly high or difficult to overcome, that we really need to begin to think about removing, that maybe once we're seen as, ensuring that students would be successful, but are actually barriers in place for students succeeding in the kinds of opportunities we want all students to have?
Yeah, I mean, without reiterating some of what we've already laid out there, I do think that I think, as Joel even just referred to, the current incentive structures is I would target as definitely one of those barriers where the funding mechanisms by which post-secondary institutions are incentivized to focus on do not really align with making sure that people have these economic and labor market outcomes that we would aspire for them to have. I do think, and this one that is a really hard one to tackle, is the public narrative conversation around this. I think that there are a lot of entrenched beliefs that people hold that become a barrier to even having a conversation. And so what are the tools that we have at our disposal to start to welcome more and more people, quote unquote, the intelligent but naive participant in the conversation into this, so that we can start to socialize some of these ideas and figure out where are the limits of people's tolerance for change, and try to get underneath what's the nature of the problem that actually exists there. And so we can actually solve for the right problem, not the wrong one. And part of what I mean by that too, Lisa, is, when we take a real look at the data, most working adults do not have a post-secondary credential currently. Most young people do not enroll or complete in any form of post-secondary education and training. And so what's the barrier that I'm talking about here is, in the general public narrative, there's a lot of young people who go to college, and by that they mean four-year college, but the actual reality is that that's not true. And so how do we sort of get that type of conversation going so that we can really have a different one about what is this responsibility we want to hold, and the aspiration we have for our young people to really feel like that they can feel secure and participate in the economy and in their community.
Thank you. Well, I apologize to all of you who put questions and comments. We couldn't get to them all. I think it's a great testament to what Kyle and Joel have shared with us today. Kyle and Joel, thank you very much for joining us. Joel, especially since you're coming to us from California very early in the morning, we can see sort of the sun coming up behind you, which is sort of nice. Sad that it started very dark for you, though. I'm sorry. For those of you that have joined us today, we invite you to join us on April 28th for a presentation from Excel and Ed around pathways and how state policies can build a skilled and educated workforce. It really builds on the conversation that we had today. We hope you will join us for that, and join me in thanking Kyle and Joel for a great conversation and really pushing our thinking about what we need to be doing as a state in regions and local supporters to help all students achieve at high levels. So Kyle and Joel, thank you again. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Take good care.
Thank you.